Today's story is not just about history. It's about people, dreams, and the power of change. It's also a story that can help you learn English in a meaningful way. When we read history, we don't just learn about the past. We learn how to express ideas, feelings, and lessons that still matter today. So, as you listen and read along, you're not only improving your English, you're also discovering how a small group of colonies became one of the most powerful nations in the world. But how did this happen? How did a few scattered settlements on the edge of a wild continent grow into the United States of America, a country known for freedom, innovation, and strength? That is the question we will explore in this story. The answer is not simple. It is a journey full of struggle, hope, and transformation. Long before there were cities, presidents, or skyscrapers, this vast land was home to many Native American civilizations. They lived across forests, deserts, and mountains, each with their own language, culture, and way of life. They hunted, farmed, traded, and built strong communities that respected nature and lived in harmony with the land. Their world was rich and peaceful, but everything would soon change. Then came new people from across the ocean, bringing different dreams and ways of living. The meeting of these worlds would shape the future in powerful and painful ways. From hardship and conflict would rise a new identity, a country that would one day become a symbol of freedom and opportunity for millions. This story is not just about victories and success. It's also about mistakes, struggles, and lessons learned. It's about how people faced challenges, rebuilt what was lost, and kept moving forward. Through every dark time, there was always light, always hope. And this journey of change continues even today. So, as we begin, open your mind and your heart. Imagine the wide open lands, the voices of the first peoples, and the dreams of those who came later. Together, we'll travel through time, learn new words, and see how history can teach us not only about a nation, but also about life itself. Let's begin the story of the history of the United States, a story of courage, challenge, and the endless desire to grow. The land before the colonies. Before ships from Europe came across the ocean, the land we now call the United States was already full of people, culture, and life. Millions of Native Americans lived across the continent. They had lived there for thousands of years, long before anyone had heard of Columbus or the idea of America. Each group or tribe had its own way of living, its own language, and its own stories. From the icy lands of Alaska to the warm plains of Texas, people built homes, hunted animals, grew crops, and raised families. In the forests of the Northeast, there were strong nations like the Iroquois. They lived in wooden houses called longhouses, where many families stayed together under one roof. They planted corn, beans, and squash, which they called the Three Sisters. These crops helped them survive through the seasons. The Iroquois were also known for their wise government system. Different tribes joined together to make decisions, showing a spirit of cooperation and peace. Farther south, in the dry lands of what is now New Mexico and Arizona, lived the Pueblo people. They built their homes from stone and clay. Some of these homes were several stories high and looked like small cities built into the cliffs. The Pueblo people were skilled farmers. Even in the desert, they found ways to grow corn and other crops using water from rivers. Their knowledge of farming and building was advanced for their time. In the Great Plains, Native American tribes like the Sioux and Cheyenne lived a different kind of life. They followed the buffalo, which gave them food, clothing, and shelter. Every part of the buffalo was used. Nothing was wasted. These tribes moved with the seasons, traveling in groups and living in tents called teepees. They lived in harmony with nature, respecting the land that gave them life. In the southeast, tribes like the Cherokee and Creek lived in warm, fertile lands. They built villages, farmed the land, and traded goods with other groups. They created beautiful art, jewelry, and pottery. Family and community were at the center of their lives. They told stories about the earth, the sky, and the animals, teaching their children to respect all living things. And in the far west, along the Pacific coast, tribes like the Chinook and Chumash lived by the sea. They were excellent fishers and canoe builders. The ocean gave them food, and the forests provided wood for tools and homes. They traded with other tribes and held ceremonies to celebrate the cycles of nature. Across all these lands, Native Americans shared one strong belief: the land was sacred. They believed that humans, animals, plants, and the earth were all connected. The land was not something to own, it was something to protect and share. They gave thanks to the rivers, the mountains, and the sky. Every hunt, every harvest, and every ceremony showed their respect for nature's balance. This world was rich, peaceful, and full of wisdom. It was a land where people lived close to nature and learned from it every day, but change was coming. Far across the ocean, in Europe, people were beginning to dream of new lands and new opportunities. They had heard stories of gold, adventure, and endless space. They built ships and started to sail west, not knowing what they would find. For the Native Americans, the world they knew was about to change forever. The first meetings between Europeans and native peoples were filled with curiosity and wonder, but also confusion and fear. The newcomers brought new goods, iron tools, glass beads, and guns, but they also brought diseases that the Native Americans had never known. Entire communities suffered, and ancient ways of life began to fade. The peaceful world that had grown over thousands of years began to face great challenges. The land that had always provided enough for everyone now became something to fight over. The newcomers wanted to own it, divide it, and control it. What had once been shared by all was suddenly claimed by a few. This moment in history marks the first great contrast in the story of America. On one side was the ancient world of harmony, respect, and balance. On the other was the arrival of new people with new ideas, ideas of ownership, power, and conquest. The meeting of these two worlds would forever shape the future of the continent. Yet even as change swept across the land, the spirit of the Native Americans did not disappear. Their stories, traditions, and wisdom still live on today. They remind us that the history of the United States did not begin with European arrival. It began long before, with the people who first called this land home. Their legacy is a vital part of America's story, one that continues to teach the value of respect, connection, and living in balance with the world around us. The age of exploration and colonization. In the late 1400s, people in Europe began to look beyond their borders. They dreamed of new lands, riches, and faster ways to reach Asia. At that time, trade with Asia brought great wealth, spices, silk, and gold, but the journey by land was long and dangerous. So, explorers began to search for a new sea route. One of them was a man named Christopher Columbus. In 1492, he sailed across the Atlantic Ocean with 3 ships, hoping to reach Asia. Instead, he landed on islands that were part of a land no one in Europe knew existed. When Columbus returned to Europe, he told stories of a new world full of promise. Soon, other countries, Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands, sent explorers too. They wanted to claim land, find treasure, and spread their religion. This time of great exploration changed the world forever. It brought new ideas and goods to Europe, but it also brought pain and loss to the people already living in America. Spain was the first to build colonies in the New World. Spanish explorers, called conquistadors, traveled across the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America. They searched for gold and silver, often using force to take what they wanted. Great civilizations like the Aztecs and Incas were conquered. In their place, Spain built new towns and missions. Priests came to teach the Christian faith to native peoples, sometimes with kindness, but often with control. As time passed, other European powers joined the race. The French explored parts of Canada and the Mississippi River. They were less interested in gold and more focused on trade, especially furs. The French often worked with native tribes, building trading partnerships and learning their languages. But even these relationships were not always peaceful. Competition for land and trade sometimes led to conflict and broken promises. The English, too, dreamed of starting new lives across the ocean. In 1607, they built the first permanent English colony in North America, Jamestown in Virginia. At first, life there was extremely hard. The settlers were not prepared for the harsh winters, lack of food, or new diseases. Many died. The Native Americans nearby helped them survive by teaching them how to grow crops and find food. But as more settlers arrived, tensions grew. The English wanted more land, and this led to fights and distrust. For many Europeans, America was seen as a place of hope and opportunity, a fresh start. But for Native Americans, it became a time of loss. Diseases brought from Europe spread quickly and killed millions, since native people had no immunity. Forests were cut down, rivers were changed, and land that had once been shared became private property. The newcomers saw the land as something to own and control, while the native peoples saw it as sacred and shared. These two views could not easily live side by side. Still, there were moments of peace and cooperation. Some settlers traded fairly, learned native languages, and even lived among the tribes. They shared knowledge and food, helping each other survive in the new environment. But these moments were small compared to the larger story of struggle. The New World was not as easy or rich as many had imagined. Life in the colonies was full of danger, hunger, and uncertainty. Many settlers died from illness or starvation. Others worked hard from sunrise to sunset just to stay alive. The dream of freedom and wealth often turned into a battle for survival. This period of exploration and colonization brought both connection and destruction. It connected two worlds that had never met before, Europe and America, but it also destroyed many lives and traditions. It showed the best and worst of human nature, courage and curiosity on one side, greed and cruelty on the other. The story of this time is not just about explorers and kings. It is also about the people who suffered, adapted, and endured. The arrival of Europeans marked the beginning of a new chapter in history, one that would shape the future of America. The land was changing, and so were the people. Out of this mix of hope and hardship, the seeds of a new nation were slowly being planted. Seeds of revolution. In the beginning, the 13 English colonies in North America were loyal to Britain. They saw themselves as British citizens, proud of their connection to the most powerful empire in the world. The colonies were growing fast. People farmed the land, traded goods, and built towns. Life was not easy, but many families had more freedom and opportunity than they would have had in Europe. Still, far across the ocean, decisions about their lives were made by the British king and his government. For many years, this worked well. Britain protected the colonies, and in return, the colonists followed British laws and paid small taxes. But after a long and expensive war between Britain and France, everything began to change. The war had cost Britain a great deal of money, and now the British government wanted the colonies to help pay for it. They created new taxes on everyday things like sugar, paper, and tea. The colonists were angry. They believed it was unfair to be taxed by a government in which they had no voice. One famous phrase spread through the colonies: "No taxation without representation." It meant that if the colonists were going to be taxed, they should have representatives in the British Parliament to speak for them. But the king and his ministers refused. They believed that Britain had the right to rule and tax the colonies however it wanted. This was the beginning of a deep and growing conflict. Many colonists still wanted to stay loyal to the crown. They respected British law and did not want to fight. But others began to dream of independence, a life where they could make their own rules. The colonies were divided between loyalty and liberty. Meetings, protests, and boycotts became common. People refused to buy British goods and began to organize local groups to discuss their rights. In 1770, tension exploded in the streets of Boston. British soldiers were sent there to keep order, but their presence made people angry. One cold night, a crowd of colonists shouted at the soldiers and threw snowballs. The soldiers fired into the crowd, killing 5 men. This event, known as the Boston Massacre, shocked the colonies. It showed how far things had gone and how dangerous the situation had become. Still, Britain did not listen. In 1773, the British government gave a special tea company the right to sell tea directly to the colonies, avoiding local merchants. It seemed like another way to control them. One night in Boston, a group of men decided to take action. They dressed as Native Americans, climbed aboard ships, and threw hundreds of chests of tea into the harbor. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. To the colonists, it was a powerful message. They would no longer accept unfair rule. But to the British government, it was an act of rebellion. The king was furious. He sent more soldiers and made new laws to punish Boston. The port was closed, and many people lost their jobs. Instead of breaking their spirit, this punishment brought the colonies closer together. They began to see themselves not just as British subjects, but as Americans, with shared hopes, struggles, and dreams. In 1774, leaders from the colonies met for the first time in Philadelphia. This group called the First Continental Congress, talked about what to do next. Some still hoped for peace, but others believed that freedom was the only answer. They agreed to stop trading with Britain and to prepare for the possibility of war. The idea of independence was growing stronger every day. Newspapers printed bold words about liberty and human rights. Writers like Thomas Paine argued that a small island should not rule a vast continent. Ordinary farmers and merchants began to see themselves as part of something larger, a fight for justice and self-rule. The colonies stood at a crossroads. On one side was loyalty to the king, safety and tradition. On the other was freedom, risk, and the unknown. The tension between these two paths could no longer be ignored. The seeds of revolution had been planted, and soon they would grow into something powerful and unstoppable. As the drums of rebellion began to echo across the land, no one could predict what would happen next. But one thing was certain: the dream of independence had taken root, and the people of the 13 colonies were ready to fight for a new future, one where they would no longer be ruled by a distant king, but would decide their own destiny. The fight for independence. The sound of war filled the air in 1775. The tension between the colonies and Britain had finally reached a breaking point. In a small town called Lexington near Boston, the first shots were fired. No one knew who started it, but those few gunshots became known as the shot heard around the world. The American Revolution had begun. Ordinary farmers and shopkeepers picked up their rifles to face one of the strongest armies on earth, the British Army. At first, it seemed impossible. The British had well-trained soldiers, powerful ships, and plenty of supplies. The colonists had little money, few weapons, and no experience in war. But what they did have was courage and determination. They were fighting not just for land, but for freedom, the right to govern themselves and live by their own rules. A man named George Washington was chosen to lead the new Continental Army. He was calm, brave, and respected by many. Washington faced many difficulties. His soldiers were cold, hungry, and poorly trained. Sometimes they had no shoes or coats in the freezing winter. But Washington never gave up. His strength inspired his men to keep fighting, even when hope seemed lost. The war spread quickly across the colonies. Some battles were won, others were lost. Cities like Boston and New York became major battlegrounds. Families were divided. Some people stayed loyal to Britain, while others supported the revolution. The fighting was not only on the battlefield, but also in people's hearts. In 1776, leaders from the 13 colonies met again in Philadelphia. They decided it was time to make their purpose clear to the world. On July 4th, they approved a powerful document written mainly by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence. It declared that the colonies were free and no longer under British rule. It said that all people had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words gave hope and meaning to the struggle. It was no longer just a fight against taxes. It was a fight for human freedom. But declaring independence did not end the war. The British Army fought harder than ever. Towns were burned, and many soldiers died on both sides. The colonists faced terrible winters, especially at a place called Valley Forge, where Washington's army nearly froze and starved. Yet even in the darkest times, they refused to surrender. They believed that freedom was worth every sacrifice. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The colonists received help from France, which sent soldiers, money, and ships. This support gave them new hope. In 1781, after years of hardship, the final battle took place in Yorktown, Virginia. With help from the French, Washington's army surrounded the British forces. After days of fighting, the British general finally surrendered. The impossible had happened. The colonies had won. When peace was signed 2 years later, the 13 colonies were officially recognized as the United States of America. The people had fought against one of the strongest empires in the world and had won their freedom. The cost was great. Many lives were lost, families were torn apart, and towns were destroyed. But the dream of liberty had become real. The American Revolution was more than just a war. It was a story of courage, unity, and belief in something greater than fear. It showed that ordinary people, when united by hope and purpose, could change the world. The new nation was still fragile, with many challenges ahead, but it had taken its first step toward becoming something extraordinary. The fight for independence ended with victory, but the journey of building a new country was only beginning. Out of fire, loss, and bravery, a new light had been born, the light of freedom that would guide the young United States into its next great chapter. Building a nation. After the long and painful fight for independence, the war was finally over. The 13 colonies were now free and called themselves the United States of America. But freedom brought new problems. The people had won their liberty, but now they had to decide how to live together as one nation. There was no king, no strong government, and no clear plan for the future. The dream of independence had come true, but building a country from nothing was a much harder task. In the early years, the states acted more like separate countries than one united nation. Each state had its own laws, money, and leaders. The only thing that connected them was a weak national agreement called the Articles of Confederation. Under this system, there was no president, no national court, and no power to collect taxes. The government could not pay soldiers, build roads, or even protect its own borders properly. It was a time of confusion and worry. Many people began to wonder if the new nation would survive at all. There were protests about money and land. Farmers struggled with debt. Different states argued over trade and borders. The spirit of unity that had helped them win the war was starting to fade. It seemed that the new country could fall apart before it even began. But among this chaos, there were leaders who refused to give up. They believed that America could only stay strong if it had a better system of government, one that balanced freedom with order. George Washington, who had led the army to victory, was one of those voices. Others, like James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and Benjamin Franklin, also knew that change was needed. In 1787, they gathered in Philadelphia for a meeting known as the Constitutional Convention. Their goal was to fix the Articles of Confederation, but soon they realized they needed to create something completely new, a constitution that could unite the nation and give it structure. The debates were long and difficult. Some leaders wanted a strong central government, while others feared it would become too powerful, like the British king they had just escaped from. They argued over how much power each state should have, how leaders should be chosen, and how to protect the rights of ordinary people. These arguments showed the contrast between chaos and order, fear and hope. At last, after months of work, they created a new plan, the United States Constitution. It established 3 branches of government, one to make laws, one to carry them out, and one to judge them. This system was designed to keep power balanced so that no one branch could become too strong. It was a bold idea, something the world had never seen before. A democracy built on laws, not kings. Even after the Constitution was written, not everyone agreed with it. Many people worried that it didn't protect individual freedoms strongly enough. So, in 1791, the leaders added 10 special amendments called the Bill of Rights. These rights included freedom of speech, religion, and the press, the right to a fair trial, and protection from unfair government actions. Together, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights became the foundation of the new nation. With the government in place, the next question was leadership. In 1789, George Washington was chosen as the first president of the United States. He was respected by everyone and known for his honesty and wisdom. Under his leadership, the country began to grow stronger. He worked hard to keep peace between states and avoid new wars with other nations. Washington showed that power could be used with fairness and humility. Still, not everything was peaceful. People continued to disagree about how the new government should work. Some wanted more power for the national government, while others wanted to protect the rights of the states. Political parties began to form, and new challenges appeared. Yet through all the arguments and mistakes, the young nation kept moving forward. The early years of the United States were full of uncertainty, but they were also full of hope. The people had learned something from their struggles. Freedom was precious, but it needed order and cooperation to survive. The Constitution became a symbol of this balance, a promise that the people, not kings or rulers, would shape their own future. From chaos, they built order. From doubt, they built belief. And from a fragile start, they built a nation that would soon inspire the world, a place where democracy, though imperfect, was alive, growing, and strong enough to stand the test of time. Expansion, conflict, and division. As the new nation began to grow, the people of the United States dreamed of a bigger and stronger country. They looked to the west, where wide rivers, tall mountains, and endless land waited. Many believed it was their destiny to move westward, to explore and build new towns across the continent. This idea was called manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were meant to spread their way of life from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. In 1803, the country took its first great step toward expansion. President Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase, buying a huge area of land from France. This single act doubled the size of the United States overnight. Suddenly there was more space for farms, cities, and dreams. Explorers like Lewis and Clark were sent to map the new land, discovering rivers, mountains, and many Native American tribes who had lived there for centuries. The stories of adventure and opportunity spread quickly. Families packed their wagons and moved west, searching for better lives. They faced long journeys, hard weather, and dangerous paths, but their hope kept them moving forward. They built small villages that later became great cities. The West seemed full of promise, new land, new chances, and new beginnings. But this expansion came with a heavy cost. The Native Americans, who had lived on these lands for thousands of years, were pushed away from their homes. Many were forced to leave their villages and move to faraway places chosen by the government. One of the saddest examples was the Trail of Tears, when thousands of Native Americans from the Cherokee Nation were forced to walk hundreds of miles to new lands. Many died on the journey from hunger, cold, and sickness. This contrast between opportunity and injustice became one of the darkest parts of America's growth. As new states joined the Union, the question of slavery grew stronger and more painful. In the southern states, many people depended on enslaved Africans to work on large farms. In the North, people began to speak out against slavery, saying it was wrong and against human freedom. The more the country expanded, the more divided it became. Every time a new state was added, people argued whether it should allow slavery or not. These arguments filled the newspapers, the government halls, and the hearts of families across the nation. It was a time of growing anger and fear. In the 1850s, the tension reached a breaking point. Abolitionists, people who wanted to end slavery, became louder. They wrote books and gave speeches that opened people's eyes to the cruelty of slavery. One famous book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, showed the pain and suffering of enslaved people and made many Americans question their beliefs. Meanwhile, others in the South defended slavery, saying their way of life depended on it. The country seemed to be breaking into two different worlds, one that believed in freedom for all, and one that did not. The dream of unity that had once built the nation was now falling apart. As the conflict grew, a tall, thoughtful man from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln entered the political scene. He spoke about equality and the idea that all men should be free. His words inspired many people, but they also angered others. When he was elected president in 1860, the southern states felt threatened. They feared he would end slavery completely. One by one, southern states began to leave the Union, forming their own government called the Confederate States of America. The North and South no longer trusted each other. The land that had once been united by hope and courage was now divided by hate and fear. By 1861, the division turned into war. The Civil War began, a terrible conflict between Americans themselves. Brothers fought brothers, and families were torn apart. The war would decide not just the future of slavery, but also the future of the United States as a single nation. The 19th century had started with dreams of discovery and growth, but it ended with deep pain and conflict. Expansion had brought wealth and power, but also sorrow and division. The people had moved west searching for freedom and opportunity, but they now faced a new and greater question. Could the United States stay united, or would it be forever divided by its own choices? The journey that began with courage and exploration was now shadowed by war and loss. Yet even in this darkness, there remained a small light of hope that through struggle and sacrifice, a stronger and fairer America might one day rise again. The Civil War and Reconstruction. The year was 1861. The sound of drums, guns, and marching soldiers filled the air. The United States was no longer united. The North and the South were now enemies in one of the darkest times in American history, the Civil War. Families were divided, neighbors became enemies, and brothers fought against brothers. It was a war not only for land or power, but for the very meaning of freedom. The North, called the Union, wanted to keep the country together and end slavery. The South, called the Confederacy, wanted to leave the Union and keep their way of life, which depended on enslaved people. The war began with hope for both sides, but soon turned into a long and painful struggle. Battles raged across fields and towns. Many soldiers were young men who left their families behind, never knowing if they would return home. In the middle of this storm stood President Abraham Lincoln. He was calm, wise, and deeply sad about the division in his country. Lincoln believed that slavery was wrong and that America must stand for freedom and equality. His words gave people hope, even in the darkest moments. In 1863, he made a historic decision. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. This act did not end the war immediately, but it changed its purpose. The fight was no longer just about keeping the Union together, it was about freedom itself. For the first time, the United States was truly fighting for the idea that all men are created equal. Many freed African Americans joined the Union Army and fought bravely for their new freedom. The war, however, was cruel and long. Entire cities were destroyed, farms burned, families starved, and more than 600,000 soldiers died. The South suffered great losses, and the North paid a heavy price too. The dream of peace felt far away, but through pain and sacrifice, the Union began to win. In 1865, the Confederate Army surrendered, and the war was finally over. The Union had survived, but the country was deeply wounded. Lincoln did not celebrate victory with pride. Instead, he spoke about forgiveness. He wanted the nation to heal and come together again. With malice toward none, with charity for all, he said. But just days after the war ended, tragedy struck. President Lincoln was shot and killed by an assassin while watching a play. His death shocked the nation. The man who had guided America through its darkest hour was gone. After the war, the country entered a new time called Reconstruction. The South was in ruins, cities destroyed, farms empty, and people lost. Millions of newly freed African Americans tried to build new lives. They went to school, started businesses, and worked to create a better future. But rebuilding was not easy. Many white Southerners resisted change, and violence and racism continued. The government passed new laws to protect the rights of former slaves. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th gave citizenship to all people born in the U.S., and the 15th gave black men the right to vote. These were great steps toward equality, but not everyone accepted them. Some states created unfair rules to stop black people from voting or getting jobs. The contrast between hope and hardship defined this time. The war had ended slavery, but the struggle for true freedom had only begun. The nation was trying to rise from its ashes, to rebuild its cities, and to heal its heart. The dream of a united America was alive again, but it would take many years of courage, learning, and change to make it real. The Civil War had destroyed much, but it had also planted new seeds. From the ruins of battle grew a new vision of what America could be, a land of freedom, equality, and unity. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the United States had been reborn. The rise of modern America. After the long years of war and rebuilding, America entered a new age. a time of invention, hard work, and big dreams. The nation was growing fast. People were moving from farms to cities, and new machines were changing the way they lived and worked. This time was called the Industrial Revolution, and it turned America from a young country into a modern power. In the late 1800s, cities like New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh were full of noise and energy. Tall buildings called factories stood everywhere, filled with workers making steel, cloth, and machines. The sound of trains and factory whistles became the heartbeat of the nation. For the first time, people could travel long distances quickly and send messages across the country in seconds. The invention of the telegraph, the railroad, and later the telephone changed everything. Millions of immigrants arrived from countries like Italy, Ireland, Germany, and China. They came with hope in their hearts, dreaming of a better life. They worked in factories, built railroads, and opened small shops. Their hard work helped build modern America. But life was not easy. Many lived in crowded houses, worked long hours, and earned little money. Children also worked in dangerous factories to help their families survive. This was a time of great contrast, a story of both success and struggle. The rich became richer, and the poor often stayed poor. While some people built big businesses and became famous for their wealth, like Andrew Carnegie in steel and John D. Rockefeller in oil, others lived in poverty, barely earning enough to eat. The streets of big cities were filled with bright lights, but also with hunger and sadness. Still, the spirit of invention and ambition was strong. Thomas Edison lit up the night with his electric light bulb, and Alexander Graham Bell changed the world with the telephone. These new inventions brought excitement and hope. People began to believe that anything was possible with hard work and creativity. At the same time, new ideas about fairness and workers' rights started to grow. Factory workers began to form labor unions to demand better pay and safer conditions. Brave men and women spoke out, saying that progress should not only help the rich, but everyone. Leaders like Jane Addams worked to improve life in poor neighborhoods, opening community centers and schools for children. The cities continued to grow, full of new immigrants, tall buildings, and dreams of success. America was no longer just a land of farms and small towns. It had become a land of machines, railroads, and business. The nation's economy became one of the strongest in the world. But with growth came corruption. Some politicians and businessmen used unfair methods to gain power and money. They bribed officials, lied to the public, and controlled markets to crush small competitors. Many people were angry about this. Writers and journalists known as muckrakers began to expose the truth. They wrote about the poor living conditions, dangerous factories, and dishonest leaders. Their words opened the eyes of the nation and pushed for reform. Despite the problems, there was a feeling of hope in the air. America was becoming a country of opportunity. The Statue of Liberty, standing tall in New York Harbor, became a symbol of freedom and welcome for millions of immigrants arriving by ship. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the statue seemed to say. By the early 1900s, America had become a world power. Its industries were strong, its cities were growing, and its influence was spreading across the globe. It built ships, invented new technologies, and began to take part in world events. Yet behind this rise, there was still struggle, workers fighting for fairness, women demanding the right to vote, and people of color seeking equality. The nation stood between two worlds, one of incredible success and one of deep inequality. The dream of prosperity was real for some, but not yet for all. Still, America's energy, creativity, and belief in progress could not be stopped. The country that had once been a small group of colonies was now becoming something greater, a modern, industrial, and ambitious power. From the farms to the factories, from the poorest immigrant to the richest businessman, everyone was part of a great transformation. The rise of modern America was not perfect, but it was full of hope, invention, and the promise of a new future, a future that would soon take the nation onto the world stage. The United States in the world. As the 20th century began, America stood tall as a strong and growing nation. Its factories were busy, its cities were crowded with workers, and its people were full of dreams. But the new century would test the country in ways no one could imagine. There would be wars, struggles, and deep changes, but also courage, progress, and hope. In 1914, a great war broke out in Europe. Many called it the Great War, later known as World War I. At first, the United States stayed out of the fighting, but soon it could no longer remain silent. In 1917, America entered the war, joining its allies to fight for freedom and peace. Millions of young American soldiers sailed across the ocean to Europe. The war was long and terrible. Trenches, tanks, and deadly weapons turned fields into battlefields. When the war finally ended in 1918, the world was changed, and America had become a global power. After the war, people wanted peace and a better life. The 1920s became known as the Roaring Twenties. Jazz music filled the air, cars filled the streets, and radios brought news and entertainment to every home. It was a time of excitement and change. Women won the right to vote, and new inventions made life easier. But beneath the happiness, danger was quietly growing. In 1929, the Great Depression began. The stock market crashed, and millions of people lost their jobs, homes, and savings. Factories closed, and farmers could not sell their crops. Families stood in long lines for food. The contrast between the joyful 1920s and the painful 1930s was shocking. America was facing one of its hardest times. Then came a man named Franklin D. Roosevelt, who became president in 1933. He spoke calmly to the nation through the radio, giving people hope. He started new programs called the New Deal to help workers find jobs, rebuild the economy, and support the poor. Slowly, America began to rise again, but peace did not last long. In 1939, another war began, World War II. This time, the threat was even greater. Countries like Germany, Italy, and Japan were trying to take over the world. In 1941, after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, America joined the fight once again. Men and women worked together for victory, soldiers fought overseas, and workers built weapons and planes at home. The war was fierce, but after years of courage and sacrifice, the Allies won in 1945. When it ended, America was stronger than ever. It had helped free the world from tyranny. But the victory came with sadness too. Millions had died, and cities across the world lay in ruins. After the war, a new kind of conflict began, the Cold War. This was not fought with guns, but with fear, competition, and power. The United States and the Soviet Union became rivals. Both wanted to lead the world, and both had powerful weapons. They raced to build rockets, go to space, and spread their ideas. The tension lasted for decades, shaping politics and life around the world. At home, another great fight was taking place, a fight for equality. African Americans, who had long suffered from unfair treatment, began to demand their rights. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s became a turning point in American history. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. spoke with courage and peace, calling for justice and equal rights. His famous words, "I have a dream," echoed through the nation, inspiring millions. The contrast between America's role as a global leader and its struggle for fairness at home showed the country's true challenge. It was powerful, but still imperfect. It stood for freedom, yet many of its people were still fighting to be free. By the end of the 20th century, the United States had faced wars, depression, and deep divisions. Yet, it had also become a land of invention, diversity, and global influence. It had sent astronauts to the moon, created computers, and built one of the world's strongest economies. Through every challenge, the nation found ways to rise again. The story of America in the 20th century is a story of contrast, of darkness and light, of loss and victory, of fear and hope. The country was tested again and again, but it always found strength in its people's spirit and belief in freedom. As the century ended, a new question appeared. What would the next chapter bring? The United States had become a world leader, but the journey was far from over. Its past had been full of struggle and success, and its future would depend on how it continued to learn, change, and stay true to its greatest ideals: liberty, equality, and hope for all. Reflections and legacy. The story of the United States is a story of great contrasts. It is a land built on dreams of freedom and opportunity, yet also shaped by moments of pain and injustice. From the first Native American civilizations to the modern world of technology and power, America's journey has always been one of struggle, hope, and change. Every generation has faced its own challenges, and every challenge has created a new chapter in the nation's story. America began as a group of small colonies, unsure and divided, but it grew into one of the most powerful nations in the world. It fought wars for independence, struggled to end slavery, and rebuilt itself after conflict and loss. It welcomed millions of immigrants who came with hope in their hearts, searching for a better life. These people helped shape the country's spirit, strong, creative, and full of ambition. Yet the story has never been perfect. Alongside freedom came inequality. Alongside progress came mistakes. The same country that promised liberty also faced times of deep division and discrimination. But what makes America special is not that it is perfect. It is that it keeps trying to become better. It learns from its past, grows stronger through struggle, and continues to move forward. The nation's greatest strength has always been its people. From farmers and factory workers to scientists and teachers, from soldiers to dreamers, each person has played a part in building the country. America's story is not written by leaders alone. It is written by everyone who believes in justice, equality, and the power of hope. Innovation and change have always been at the heart of America. From the invention of the light bulb to the landing on the moon, the country has shown what human creativity can achieve. But perhaps its greatest invention is not a machine or a technology. It is the idea that everyone deserves a chance to live free and pursue their dreams. Today, the United States continues to face new challenges, economic struggles, political differences, and questions about equality and climate. But just like in the past, these challenges are also opportunities. Each generation has the power to learn from history and to create a better tomorrow. When we look back, we see how far the nation has come, and when we look forward, we see how much more it can still become. The history of the United States is not finished. It is still being written every day by people like you and me. Every action, every dream, and every act of kindness adds a new line to this great story. So, as we close this journey through history, remember that learning about the past helps us build a better future. The story of America is a story of courage, mistakes, hope, and endless possibility. It reminds us that no matter where we come from, we all have the power to make a difference. If you enjoyed learning this story and want to keep improving your English while discovering more inspiring lessons about life and history, make sure